Hello, in this episode we're doing exercises to help us with our modelling skills. So this is to practice the techniques that we've learnt already in the course. This is all part of a bigger course on gabit.co.uk for learning Blender right from beginners to advanced levels. So how this will work, there's 3 stages. I'll show you the model first, then I'll give you a small tip, and then I'll show how I would go about making the model. And you might want to pause, of course, in between each of those. So make sure you have a go at modelling these things. It really helps to practice and have a go at the techniques, and it helps you to learn by doing. So let's start with the first one, which is this weird box shape. So you can pause the video here. The tip is E to extrude and S to scale. So pause the video and have a go at making that. Okay, so how do we make this? Well, we start with the basic cube. So I'll click over here and I'll make a new one. Shift A to add, mesh cube. Remember the add menu down here as well. And then into edit mode with tab. And I'm going to face mode. So control tab will give me this menu. Face mode, you can also get that menu down here. Click on the top face. Right click, of course, to select. E to extrude. And instead of pulling it outwards, I right click to set the extrusion. S to scale, and then E to extrude again. Left click this time because I've pulled it out. If I extrude and right click, it will set it back where it starts, okay? So I'd grab in the Z and pull that one up. E to extrude, S to scale, E to extrude, and I'm pulling it down with my mouse. Okay, so E to extrude, S to scale, and you end up with this sort of shape. The inset tool does a very similar thing. So I is the same as E to extrude and S to scale. So you can use that, but it's just another thing to learn. So whilst you're a beginner, I suggest just E to extrude and S to scale. It's a bit easier to remember because they're tools you're going to be using all the time. Okay, so that's the first one. So here's the next one. Similar principles. So pause the video, have a go at that. There's no tip for this one because it follows similar principles, so see how you get on. Okay, so how do we make this one? Well, I'll make it over here. Shift A, add a cube, and into edit mode. Bring the whole thing in with scale. Bring that top one down with grab this time in the Z axis. So I pressed G to grab, Z to constrain it to the Z axis. This time E to extrude, and I've right clicked so it's back in the same place. Pull it up, scale it in. E to extrude, right click, S to scale. E to extrude, I'll go all the way up. And I'll worry about this bit in a second. E to extrude, right click, S to scale. E to extrude. E to extrude, slightly different this time, S to scale. There's a couple of ways you can do these things. And E to extrude. And to make that inset, we can press I if we want to, or E to extrude, S to scale. Now, I does a better job because this deforms it slightly, whereas I to inset keeps the same distance around the outside, so that's a bit easier. So the inset tool is good there. But if you don't want to use the inset tool, then E to extrude, scale, and then you just scale this by the Z. And then E to extrude again. So you can see the use behind the inset tool there, and we've got something very similar. Although it's a completely different size because of the perspective. Okay, so the next one. Okay, looks a little bit tougher, doesn't it? So hopefully these are all things you've learned before in the previous courses, and this should just be developing your skills, so pause the video if you don't want to hear the tip. The tip is Subdivision Surface Modifier and Control R for loop cuts. So pause the video and have a go. Okay, so the starting point this time for me was a cylinder, so Shift A, mesh cylinder, and 20 vertices is fine because we're going to add a subdivision surface modifier to this in a minute. You could even go lower than this, maybe I will actually, I'll go 16. Because remember, the subdivision surface modifier adds faces. Okay, I'll just bring it down slightly so they're the same size. And into edit mode. Let's grab this top face, extrude, and then scale. Extrude. So they're the same principles. And you can see I've made a mistake here. I've made this one way too fat and this one's a lot thinner. So what I can do, rather than just undoing and making that face smaller with scale, I can select a face loop. So you can select edge loops and face loops. To select a face loop, we need to select an edge down the side of the loop we want. So if I Alt right click on one of these edges, it selects that face loop. Now I can scale it in. I'll be doing that again in a second, so don't worry if you missed that. So here, extrude, scale, extrude. We use the inset tool here, and then we'll extrude that in so it's got a opening. Okay, so let's say we wanted the top of this sort of bottle or vase or whatever it is, and we wanted to scale it in. To select the face loop, we select that edge there, Alt right click. So your mouse is over the edge, Alt right click, and then you can scale just that one in. But remember, if you're scaling, Shift Z to constrain it in the X and Y to not scale it in the Z axis, and it will keep that size. If I Alt right click on this edge, I can select this edge loop, you see. So it depends on the edge that you're selecting when in face mode. Okay, this has got a bit more of a curve, so Control R here, click once and then you can drag, that's left click, and then left click to select where you want it, and then scale it in. Okay, that looks alright at the moment, so we'll add our Subdivision Surface Modifier, go to the spanner, add modifiers, Subdivision Surface Modifier down here. Okay, and it looks all weird, and we get that problem at the bottom. That's because we've got an N-gon at the bottom, and we've got no supporting loop cuts. You can obviously go in and do the mean crease. I prefer to add loop cuts, so let's add one down the bottom here. And it's already looking better. Let's go to face mode, Control Tab to get this menu, right click to face mode, extrude, and scale it in. I could have used inset there as well, but now it's looking a bit more sensible. We need to support this loop here so it has that sort of structure. So Control R, left click, drag it up, and left click again. Control R here, so we'll give it a bit more support, and I think one in here, and I'm just going to scale that in a bit so it looks similar. And now the top needs support, so we go Control R, pull one down, Control R, pull one up, and perhaps around the bottleneck there. And lastly, we need one in here, don't we? And one at the top here. Maybe a tiny bit more support there as well. So remember, one either side of your edge that you want to define. And the closer they are, so if I Alt right click and I want to move these, Alt right click selects loop cuts, and I can GG will edge slide. If I press G, it will distort it. So GG for edge slide, very handy. So lastly, it's not looking quite like the bottle over there. That's because we have to add smooth shading over here. You have to do that in object mode, so smooth shading. And I'll just up the view, and there we go, looking very similar. Okay, so the last one for this session, let's have a look. Okay, so pause the video if you don't want to hear the tip. The tip is, think about your starting point, so your mesh that you choose to start with. Okay, so have a go at that. Right, so let's have a go at creating this one. Now there's several ways of doing this. You can start with something like a cylinder or a cube and subdivide it a lot. The easiest way that I can see is to add, with Shift A UV sphere. I'll just bring that back over here. Now into edit mode, and I can select the top faces. Let's go to top view with 7 on a numpad, orthographic with 5, and then let's select some faces. A to deselect the faces, and then C to circle select, and I'll select these ones, and then I'll extrude those upwards. Then I'll scale those in the Z axis 0, and that will flatten them all out. This time we're going to get this face loop here by pressing Alt right click and then extruding it upwards. I'll indent this a bit more later. This face loop here by Alt right click and extrude that outwards. Scale, but Shift Z, remember. and I need to create some curves in here. I'm going to do this very slightly differently so we learn something new. Control R and just do one loop cut and scale that in to roughly where I want it. And I'm going to use the bevel tool just to learn something new. So Control B, and I can pull that out and use my wheel to create some bevels. That's quite handy. So Control B is the bevel tool, and left click to select. I'll do that once more. So you select your edge loop, Control B, pull it out to the distance you want, and then middle mouse button to wheel. I'll just do 2 because we'll subdivide it in a second. That's great. And I feel like this edge loop here with Control R may need scaling it a bit. There we go. Now let's sort out the top. So I'm gone back to face mode and I'm selecting this face loop here. I'm going to scale that out a bit. Remember to press Shift Z. And lastly, remember to press full stop on your numpad so you can zoom into that area. Much easier to move around. A to deselect, C to circle select, and I'll just select this lot here. Let's just scale that in really slightly and pull it down. I'll do one more edge loop to give it some support when I do the Subdivision Surface Modifier. I'll go up the top here, Subdivision Surface Modifier, push the views up, and let's go to Object Mode and Smooth. Okay, it's not quite the same, and you can edit the shape quite easily by going into Edit Mode and selecting faces and pulling them in slowly and sorting it out. But I'll let you do that. Okay, so that's the first episode of the exercises. If you haven't already, then check out gabbit.co.uk for more of the same. Thanks for watching.